It was in this cemetery at Bingley in Yorkshire that was to begin the story of one of the most prolific serial killers of the 20th century. This is the true story from two serving police detectives who were on the case.
Peter William Sutcliffe, also known as the Yorkshire Ripper, was one of this country's most notorious murderers. He was employed as a gravedigger here at Bingley Cemetery, and it is said that it is actually at this grave when he said that he received the word of God telling him to murder prostitutes. He continued to murder 13 women, not all prostitutes, and 7 attempt murders. He was arrested in 1981 and he used that as an excuse at his trial at the Old Bailey. The first recorded murder was a woman in Leeds called Wilma McCann. That was in 1975. But there had been an earlier attack on a woman called Anna Rogulski in Keighley. He did in fact go on to murder a total of 13 women and 7 attempted murders.
Peter William Sutcliffe was born on the 2nd of June 1946 in Bingley near Bradford. He was one of 6 children. He married Sonia Zermer in 1974 and they set up home at Heaton near Bradford. Prior to her marriage, it was said that Sonia had been receiving treatment for schizophrenia. Perhaps, if true, this had some bearing on her actions in providing Sutcliffe with alibis that allowed him to continue on his killing spree.
We're actually at the scene of the original murder, a woman by the name of Wilma McCann, and her body was found just behind us on the slope here. We're in the playing field off Scott Hall Road in Leeds. I at the time was in CID, I was a detective, but Andy Laptew, who's with me now, an old friend, he was actually in the task force in uniform. He later did come into CID and he actually interviewed the Peter Sutcliffe sometime later, but at the time Andy was in uniform on the task force, and when the body was found he was involved in a fingertip search in this area.
The date was the 30th of October 1975, and Wilma McCann was an active prostitute who obviously had come across Peter Sutcliffe that day. They'd agreed to have sex, but Wilma was very impatient with Peter Sutcliffe because he wouldn't get on with the act, and she was telling him to hurry up, and of course he lost his temper and bludgeoned her to death and then stabbed her round the lower abdomen. Now this went down as the first Ripper attack, but it was actually the 4th attack. There were 3 others that resulted in severe injuries, but not death. And as Roger said, right behind me, on the slope, lay the body of Wilma McCann.
He had also attacked Anna Rogulski, Olive Smelt, and Tracy Brown, a 14-year-old schoolgirl. All survived and gave a good description of Sutcliffe. It was on the 20th of January 1976 that Sutcliffe committed his next murder. She was Emily Jackson, age 42. Her body was found in Leeds. Marcella Claxton, who was 20, was lucky to survive an attack in Leeds by Sutcliffe in May 1975. His next victim was Irene Richardson, age 28. Her body was also found in Leeds on the 5th of February 1977.
Behind me is number 9 Oak Avenue, which is a block of flats. Patricia Atkinson, also known as Tina Atkinson, was murdered at number 3, which she occupied. She was followed home from the Carlisle pub just up the road by Sutcliffe, who then entered her flat, put her on the bed, covered her with bed linen and then proceeded to stab her numerous times. And after he'd finished his assault, he left a boot print on top of the bedding which would cover her stomach. This occurred on the 23rd of March 1977.
On the 26th of June 1977, Sutcliffe murdered Jane MacDonald, a 16-year-old girl from Leeds. Now no woman in Yorkshire was safe.
On the 10th of July 1977, Maureen Long, who wasn't a prostitute, was attacked here in Mount Street, Bradford. The area has changed considerably since those days. Behind me was wasteland, and it was used by members of the travelling fraternity as a campsite. Maureen had been hit on the head and stabbed at least 4 times. The occupants of the camp raised the alarm and police attended. Despite the assault on Maureen, she survived the attack, but long-lasting effects were severe brain damage and terrible depression, and she recently died. Maureen tried to seek assistance but was found in the middle of the road, which was in those days cobbled.
On the 1st of November 1977, he struck again, this time in Manchester. She was 20-year-old Jean Jordan. Marilyn Moore, 25, from Leeds, was lucky on the 14th of December 1977 not to become another one of Sutcliffe's victims.
This is the site where the body of Yvonne Pearson was found. She went missing on the 21st of January 1978, and there were numerous sightings of her reported all over Britain as far as London. So it was some time before the search for Yvonne Pearson was increased. However, when she was murdered, the murderer piled a lot of rubble and dirt on top of her. Now, she was not found until 2 months after she disappeared. That was the 23rd of March 1978, exactly 2 calendar months after her disappearance. And at that time, the murderer had placed a copy of the Daily Mirror under her extended arm so she would be found. But up till then, the body was completely obscured by the wasteland rubble and debris.
Garrard's Timber Merchants in Great Northern Street, Huddersfield, is the scene of the murder of Ellen Ricker. Across the road from where I am now, you'll see a building which it says Hardwood Shed, and there is an entrance just below the sign, and that is the actual position where Ellen was attacked and murdered. She was hit over the head with a ball-peen hammer, and her body was taken round the back and covered over. Her twin sister Rita would walk onto the far end of Great Northern Street to the junction with Hill House Lane, and they would solicit it for prostitution along with others who were working in the area to pick up clients.
It was on the 16th of May 1978 he murdered again in Manchester. This time it was 40-year-old Vera Millward.
I'm at Savile Park at Halifax, which is the scene of the murder of Josephine Whittaker. At the time of her murder, she was 19 years of age, a single girl, and lived with her parents nearby. She worked at the local building society, and on the 4th of April 1979, shortly after her 19th birthday, she left her parents' home to visit her grandparents, who lived less than a mile away, and she stayed until 11:30 p.m. to walk home. And en route she was followed by Peter Sutcliffe, who happened to be patrolling in the area, obviously looking for a victim. En route she would have to pass Savile Park when walking up Savile Park Road on her way home. She was obviously waylaid by Peter Sutcliffe, who struck her over the head twice with a hammer at the side of the park and dragged into the grassed area of the park, where he stabbed her 25 times in the abdomen, chest, thighs and in her vagina.
It was during the inquiry that the infamous Wearside Jack tapes were received initially and sent to George Oldfield, the officer leading the inquiry.
I'm Jack. I see you are still having no luck catching me. I have the greatest respect for you, George. But Lord, you are no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started. I reckon your boys are letting you down, George. They can't be much good, can they?
Believing them to be genuine, this set the inquiry back, and anyone without a Wearside accent was eliminated, allowing Sutcliffe to continue murdering. John Humble was in fact Wearside Jack, and he later called a special hotline to the police in Sunderland to tell them it was a hoax. It was never passed on to the Ripper inquiry. Humble was later sentenced to 8 years for obstructing the course of justice.
This is just outside Peter Sutcliffe's house at number 6 Garden Lane, Heaton, Bradford. In August 1979, D.C. Greenwood, a colleague who now has sadly departed, we came to this house and we spent something like 5.5 hours interviewing Peter Sutcliffe and his wife, who provided an alibi for him. I was given an instruction to visit Peter William Sutcliffe at this address because his vehicle had been sighted in numerous red light areas. The sightings were of a covert nature and were records of men on their own in a vehicle, no passengers, just a man on his own. And Sutcliffe was one such man. There was a lot of striking features about Sutcliffe. He had a strong resemblance to the Marilyn Moore photo of the man Dave who assaulted her in Leeds. He had a gap in his teeth, evidence of which was found on 2 of his victims. He had the correct shoe size, the suspect occupation, and he also visited Coles Cranes in Sunderland, where the hoax tape and letter were posted from. After we'd finished interviewing Sutcliffe, Graham and myself had great misgivings. We sat and chatted in the car for quite a lengthy time, and we did a thorough inquiry on him, Criminal Records Office, at the local information offices, the collators, everything that we could do to find him a link to the case. I took this report to a senior investigating officer, Dick Holland, a man who I'd put on a pedestal, a great role model for me, a man who I admired a lot. He asked me, "Is he a Geordie?" I said, "No, he lives in Bradford, he's from these parts." Then Dick Holland hit the roof for some reason. He says, "If anybody mentions photo fits to me, they'll be doing traffic for the rest of the service." The sad thing is, I thought, had I done anything I could have done? Could I have done anything more? And it was a time of reflection which I found really depressing. However, when I reconsidered, I'd done everything that I could do and I couldn't do any more. The sad thing is that another 3 women were murdered after I'd submitted that report. Maybe if I'd have been a bit forceful and stuck to my guns a lot more, something might have been done. But that's history now and we can't change that. This is Backash Grove in Bradford, where Barbara Leach was murdered. She was struck on the head with a severe blow and stabbed no less than 8 times. She was then bundled into a niche reserved for dustbins. A very sort of terrible way to end a life. She wasn't a prostitute, she was a student and of excellent character, totally blameless.
Marguerite Walls from Leeds was his 12th victim on the 20th of August 1980.
Teresa Marie Sykes, aged 16. She was an unmarried mother who lived with her boyfriend, Jim Fury, in a house just further along this road. About 8 p.m. on the 5th of November, bonfire night, 1980, Teresa left home to go the short distance to a cigarette shop at the end of the road. She bought her cigarettes, and on the way back home, she realised that someone was following her. She felt 2 blows to her head and screamed out loud. It was so loud that her boyfriend, Jim Fury, who was a Keep Fit fanatic, came out having heard the scream, together with the next door neighbour, and they ran where they saw the man in the distance running away. They gave chase but could not find him. We later discovered that in fact it was Peter Sutcliffe, and he had hidden in a garden behind a hedge. The police had been called, and the dog found a trace of him, but eventually the search was called off, and Sutcliffe was able to make good his escape.
His last victim was 20-year-old Jacqueline Hill, a student from Leeds, on the 17th of November 1980.
Today I'm here in the driveway of Light Trade's house at Melbourne Avenue, which is in the Broomhill area of Sheffield, and this is the actual position where Peter William Sutcliffe, known as the Yorkshire Ripper, was arrested by 2 patrolling policemen, Bob Hides and Bob Ring. And it's actually in this position here, which is inside the gates of the building, where he was arrested. What had happened just prior to it, just minutes before, the 2 officers were driving along in a police car, and they saw the car parked in this, they just positioned for 2 cars. They took a note of the number, they drove on, but within a few minutes they did actually do a check on the car and realised it was one. The number plates had been reported stolen from a scrapyard, the Cooper Bridge scrapyard, which is between Huddersfield and Dewsbury. They then came back to the scene and they went to the car, questioned Peter Sutcliffe, who gave some unsatisfactory answers, and told him that he was being arrested for stealing number plates. They were taking him to the police car, and he said that he felt he was taking shot, could he have a pee, and they allowed him to urinate, which he did. Here, by this waste recycling bin, at that time was an oil drum, and this is where Peter Sutcliffe, when he said he went for a pee, this is where he concealed a ball-peen hammer and the Phillips screwdriver, which he had been using as his murder weapons. The officers rang Dewsbury division, where the Cooper Bridge spares comes in that division, and they spoke to the control room sergeant, a sergeant by the name of Jack Rigg. And Jack Rigg was aware of the Yorkshire Ripper and all the murders he'd committed, and he questioned the officers as to the description of the man. He became suspicious because they were thinking of bailing him for just a minor offence, bailing him to the police station. It was decided that escort would be sent over to Sheffield to bring him back to Dewsbury, where he was lodged in the female cell in the police station. He was then collected by 2 officers from the murder incident room, detectives John Boyle and Des O'Boyle. They then took him to the murder incident room at Leeds, where shortly afterwards he admitted the offences, and this included 13 murders and several attempts.
Sutcliffe was arrested on the 2nd of January 1981 and appeared at the Old Bailey in London in May that year. He was found guilty of all charges and given several life sentences, and to serve a minimum of 30 years. This was later changed by the Home Secretary to life, and that life meant life for the remainder of his natural life. Sutcliffe's mother, Kathleen, died in not knowing that her son was the Yorkshire Ripper. His father John died in 2004, and like Sonia, he had also given Sutcliffe his alibis. It was felt by other officers, mainly experienced detective sergeants and constables, that George Oldfield was out of his depth. He was arrogant and gruff, and if he had listened to others, Sutcliffe would have been arrested earlier. After his arrest, senior officers appeared before television cameras, grinning and saying how delighted they were with the outcome. But this was frowned upon by the other police officers and done in very poor taste. It wasn't just the victims and their families that were affected by Sutcliffe. It was the thousands of police officers who had spent over 6 years on the case. There were marriage breakups amongst some of those officers due to the long hours that they were forced to work and the enormous stress that was placed upon them. This also included those other people who were interviewed by the police, who had their lives totally altered, all because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. So ended the largest inquiry undertaken by the West Yorkshire Police Force, as when the women of West Yorkshire were terrified to go out at night.